Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the national Bleav Network. And joining me to preview the Texans-Patriots game is Bleav Network colleague, Patriot Report podcast host, and the Boston Globe's Christopher Price. And first of all, Christopher, great to catch up with you on Drake Maye week in New England.
Exactly. This is a big week. I'm curious to get your take on Houston's belief and in Houston's attitude toward, they'll surely be the number one victim. The first game on the road to Drake Maye's eventual path to Canton will start on Sunday against Houston. And I'm half joking here. We know none of us here in New England know what's in store for Drake Maye. He did have a good summer, and I've said this several times before, and we can get into it a little bit, that in a vacuum, he outplayed Jacoby Brissett. But really, over the course of the summer, in the first month or so of the season, there was no infrastructure around him necessary to support a successful young quarterback like we saw last year in Houston. So I think in a lot of ways, the Patriots, at least as they exist right now, are looking toward the Texans as a model in terms of young coach, young quarterback. How do we get things turned around?
Yeah, there's more similarities, and I want to get into that in just a second. But the Texans have been able to terrorize some young quarterbacks early on. Anthony Richardson, although he had some success with the long ball, but, Caleb Williams, Josh Allen, not young, but, they worked him over pretty good. And they also worked over Trevor Lawrence pretty good, too. What are you guys expecting from Drake Maye? What was the good and bad from preseason and training camp?
I think the good was he showed an ability to bounce back after making errors. He was not what Bill Belichick used to call an error repeater. He saw something, would go through the process, would throw an interception or throw an incompletion or have a rough series, and he would be able to identify the issues that he had, correct them, and then the next series or the next game or the next week, whatever the case may be, he would come out and look better. And so he has really ascended since the summer. He had a rough start to the summer in a lot of areas. I mean, there was no doubt when we were, sitting up on the hill at training camp, first week or so at training camp, that Jacoby Brissett was leaps and bounds ahead of him. But he worked again. He improved. He was able to show lots and lots of good over the course of the summer. And again, like I said, reached a point at the end of training camp where he was better than Jacoby Brissett, but they just did not have the guys around him to be able to support him in a manner in which he needed to be intended. You could argue that a lot of the bad is kind of related to that as well. He's young. He doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. And I think he's going to get a real education at the hands of the Houston Texans defense. But, you would expect, based on what we've seen from him so far, to be able to improve, whether it's going out and throwing an early pick on Sunday and then maybe improving in the second half, making the necessary adjustments, or taking the game itself as a teaching tool and moving into Jacksonville. So I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest difference, if you look at the Patriots over the first 5 games and then maybe what you could expect from Drake Maye, they want to play faster than they did. They want to be efficient. They want to be able to just kind of look like a competent passing game. And there were moments in the first 5 weeks where really, and probably there was a shared amount of blame, but they really didn't do much in the passing game. The first 5 weeks, they ran the ball really well, and I expect they're going to try and run the ball on Sunday, but they didn't really run the ball, or they didn't really pass the ball. They didn't really have much success. And so I think what the Patriots fans are hoping for on Sunday is to be able to get a little bit more in the passing game than they saw over the first 5 weeks of the season.
Yeah, me and my co-host, Steven, we talked about the fact that Jacoby was near the bottom in just about every passing category. Are you surprised the Patriots made the QB change, though, against the Texans?
Yeah, I am, Robert. And this is the big thing up here is that, well, if you knew you were going to pull the ripcord, why didn't you do it last week against a banged-up Dolphins defense? Or why don't you do it next week in London facing the Jaguars, who are struggling as well on the defensive side of the ball? You want to do whatever you can do. And again, you guys know this down in Houston. You want to do whatever you could do to create a kind of a clean runway for this young man. You want to put him in winnable situations to build his confidence. And you want to kind of go from there. This does not initially present itself as a quote unquote winnable game for the Patriots. Last week was a more winnable game. a game in London, coming up against the Jaguars. That's a more winnable game. So that's the big debate around here, that I think everyone understood that it was going to be Drake Maye's time. They just didn't understand why it needed to be this week as opposed to last week or next week.
Is the Patriots offensive line as bad as advertised, or does that have more to do with Jacoby Brissett and him not being a threat to throw the ball down the field?
I think that there's a shared level of blame when you talk about the struggles of the offensive line and the quarterback. I think it's more on the offensive line. Honestly, if we're going to get right down to it, I think it's more on the front office, because they didn't do enough to address the left tackle position. They've had 5 different left tackles start for them over the first 5 weeks of the season. That's inexcusable, especially when you're talking about, you want to get a rookie quarterback out there. So there's a lot of blame to go around. The overall play of the offensive line, I think, obviously figures into it. Jacoby Brissett has a penchant, or had a penchant, for holding on to the ball a little bit longer than he probably needed to be. He was a cautious quarterback. And I say that not necessarily as a character flaw, but, it's a positive and a negative when you're talking about a still developing offensive line. So really, ultimately, to answer your question, I think there's a shared level of blame to go around when it comes to the passing game issues that the Patriots have had. The offensive line, the front office's inability to find really good fits for the offensive line, and Jacoby Brissett.
Tons of similarities between Jerod Mayo and D'Amico Ryans, both drafted by their respective franchises at middle linebacker, both incredible leaders in their playing career who were brought back to try to save terrible situations with their franchise, and both given highly touted rookie quarterbacks. What's the early impression of Mayo in New England?
I think it's mostly good, but at the same time, there is, what's the phrase that I'm looking for here? You never want to be the guy who follows the guy. You want to be the guy after that. And I think that Bill Belichick still casts a very long shadow here in New England. And I think that Mayo still feels that from time to time. It's not like Belichick goes out of his way to kind of comment on the Patriots, but I think that influence, that feeling is still there. It's like, well, Bill wouldn't have done it in this situation. He would have done it in a different way. And so he's still working on forging his own identity. I think that we're at a really interesting crossroads here when you talk about Jerod Mayo's. We're in the infancy of his coaching career, but he's still come to a very important kind of cross point here, pivot point here, because you're making the switch at quarterback relatively early in the season. Again, I think we all knew it was going to happen, but this is a relatively early point. I think they wanted to wait as long as possible. You're facing some off-field trouble with the Jabril Peppers incident, and kind of setting aside the very real-world ramifications of what's going on there. That has an impact on the franchise. You're also moving some guys around. They had Matthew Judon. They traded him during training camp. Christian Barmore, one of their most important defensive players, has gone down with a blood clot issue. And so you're seeing a young coach having to deal with an awful lot of big issues early on in his career. And I think the way he handles them is going to come to define at least the start of his career. But I think he's going to have 2, maybe 3 years here in New England. So there's a lot of slack on that rope when you're talking about his coaching career. But initial reports, from my perspective, from working with him, being down there on a regular basis, he's been good. He's been transparent. He's been engaging. He's been good to talk to. But it's still very early, so we'll see.
Yeah, Pepper's about 20 allegations behind Deshaun Watson, so he's got to get it together, get busy if he wants to catch him. Also, a guy that you know about very well is on the Texans. What was your impression of Nick Caserio when he was up in New England?
I think he was great. I do. I think he was great. I still think, Robert, there's a parallel timeline out there or an alternate universe, I should say, out there where Nick Caserio became the GM of the New England Patriots. He was here for so long, and he basically grew up as an executive with the Patriots. He was a coach for a long, long time. He's a personnel guy, and he fundamentally ascended to the role of GM, or at least co-GM with Bill. I think very highly of Nick. And even when he was going through his issues early on in his career in Houston, I pleaded with people to just stick with him. He knows what he's doing. It's a long process. And I think it's funny. I was joking with my podcast partner, Chris Hogan, this week about, like, he's wrecked the reclamation curve, the expectation level for rebuilding teams, because he's done, and D'Amico Ryans and the rest of the Texans franchise, to be fair, done a tremendous job when it comes to turning things around. And now instantaneously people are like, well, look at the Texans. They were able to turn it around like that. Why can't we have what the Texans have. So really for me, I think Nick is great. And I think he deserves every level of success that he's had. I've had the chance to talk to him last March at the Combine and catch up. And I do. I just think the world of him as an executive and a person.
Yeah. One of the things that obviously helped him was CJ Stroud. So that's a big deal when you're trying to pull off one of these reclamation projects and all of a sudden he looks like a genius. But I wanted to get to some key matchups with you on Sunday. Just a quick reminder, though, to our audience, join us for our live Texans-Patriots postgame show as soon as the Sunday game ends. We need your comments and questions. Of course, for this show and all our content, I want your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Click the like button to support us. And if you haven't done so already, click the subscribe and notifications on YouTube so you know when we upload our new content. And, of course, subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you can listen while you're out and about. Well, Christopher, let's move to the key matchups. And is there an area or two on either side of the ball that the Patriots can take advantage of? No Nico to stretch the field is a major concern here in Houston. I can just help you lead into that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge advantage for the Patriots. Look, the Patriots are feeling good the last couple of weeks because you could run down the list and you could say, well, they're catching the Niners at the right time because they don't have Christian McCaffrey. Well, they got blown out by the Niners. They're catching the Dolphins at the right time because the Dolphins don't have Tua. Well, they end up losing to the Dolphins. So we can talk about how Nico Collins is not going to be on the field for Houston this Sunday. But look, until the Patriots are able to execute in key moments and take advantage of the fact that one of the opposing team's most dynamic offensive player, maybe one of the most dynamic wide receivers in the league, is not going to be on the field. I'm not quite buying that line, at least quite yet. I do think there are some winnable matchups for this New England team on Sunday. I think that special teams-wise, look, I know Fairbairn has been a phenomenal kicker, but the Patriots special teams have been really good as a group over the first 5 games of the season. They're going to need some special teams magic because the margin for error coming into this thing is absolutely zero. So that is, for me, one of the big things that they need to be able to execute on when it comes to this matchup. I think the other thing, too, Drake Maye in his first game is going to need an awful lot of help from his offensive skill position players. Look, what they're going to do is they're going to try and take advantage of Maye's athleticism as opposed to Brissett. They're going to get him on the run. They're going to try some boots. They're going to try, they're going to try and have him throw on the run. But they need from Pop Douglas, they need Kendrick Bourne, they need Hunter Henry, they need these guys who have shown themselves to be dependable offensive options over the last year plus, really to kind of step to the fore. The other thing, and I'm just saying this here, it's with the Houston defense, I know it's pick your poison, and so I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots tried to run the ball a little bit more consistently than they've done maybe over the last 2-3 weeks. Ramondre Stevenson, his occasional ball security issues aside, when he's run hard, when he's been able to hold on to the ball, has done very, very well. And so I think he is going to play either good or bad. I think he's going to play an awful big role on Sunday. If he holds on to the football, that is one of those things that the Patriots need to do. We talk about winnable matchups and we talk about, taking advantage of certain situations. He's one of those guys where, again, if he can hold on to the football and the Patriots execute the way that they've been able to execute when they've been at their best, I think they're going to have a good shot in this one.
Yeah, tons of news coming out as we record Thursday night. We had some good news for the Texans with Titus Howard, the right tackle, back practicing again. Damian Pierce and Joe Mixon both practicing. Mixon, especially a huge deal. Pierce, it looks like he's going to play. He's been practicing most of the week. From the Patriots' perspective, what does concern you most on either side of the football? Where's the Texans' biggest advantage, do you think?
I think the Texans are a little bit deeper, even without Nico Collins, in terms of the passing game than maybe the Patriots are comfortable with. They've gotten a really good performance to start the year from Christian Gonzalez, but there's been a drop off back there. And again, Duggar has been in and out of the lineup at safety because of health issues. You're not going to get Jabril Peppers this week. Jonathan Jones has been okay. Marcus Jones has been okay. The other thing too is that the Patriots defense has to do a better job than they've done over the first 5 weeks when it comes to keeping the quarterback in the pocket. They got burned by Brock Purdy in San Francisco, Aaron Rodgers in New York. It wasn't so bad last week with Snoop Huntley, but opposing quarterbacks have done really well when it comes to throwing on the run, getting outside the pocket, operating kind of, without a free rush. So one of the things, and I actually wrote about this today for the Globe, that it's been a huge point of emphasis for them. And again, the numbers were better this past week against Miami, but they cannot let CJ Stroud out of the pocket. It's absolutely vital. They need to be able to do a better job setting the edge. Anthony Jennings, Dietrich Wise, Keon White. Those are key names that you're going to learn an awful lot about between now and Sunday. Those are the key guys for the Patriots when it comes to setting that edge, either against the pass, against the run, whatever the case may be. If Stroud is able to get outside the pocket and make plays, while moving around, I think that's going to be a huge problem for New England, because, again, the last few weeks when that's happened, they've had defensive breakdowns all over the field. So if I'm a New England fan, that's my biggest concern, is that C.J. Stroud is going to be able to operate with impunity and find targets all over the field and just move the ball up and down the field. If I'm New England, what I want to do offensively, I want to control the game. I want to control the tempo. I want to be able to run the football. I want to try and put together 6, 7, 8-minute drives where you can keep C.J. Stroud on the sidelines for as long as possible. Because if this game gets into the 20s or 30s, New England has no chance at all. If New England wants to win this game, they need to shrink it down, and they need to win like 16-12 or something ridiculous like that. I know it's a long shot, but that's the game plan for success if you're the Patriots. Yeah,
I was going to ask you the formula, and that's it. And the Texans, I mean, the issue they're having, Christopher, is they just shoot themselves in the foot offensively. The penalties, they had a couple of turnovers last week uncharacteristically on offense, and that's really where this game, becomes winnable for the Patriots. That the Texans fans, I can tell you, they're getting a little bit frustrated because these games that they've played so far shouldn't be as close as they've been. And it's a 7-point spread. And I don't know what you think, Christopher, but I'm like, man, the Texans haven't been able to cover all year. I think it's not only winning. I think a lot of Texans fans are like, can we at least cover this week? Because, that means we scored some points.
Robert, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's good news for me. I picked the Patriots I picked Houston not to cover. I think Houston's going to win, but I don't think they're going to cover. I think 7 points in New England is an awful lot of points, because this team, look, I've done 15 minutes or so here of kind of semi doom and gloom about the Patriots. They're still competitive defensively. Look, for all their fallback, for everything that we've described, the fact that they've come up short, they were a couple plays away from beating Seattle at home, and they were one heel away from beating Miami last week, which means that they're that close to 3-2, and they're a good team. They're a competitive young team. When they don't, to your point, with the Texans, they don't shoot themselves in the foot. They took 12 penalties last week, the Patriots. For a team, again, with no margin for error, like zero margin for error, they're not talented enough to overcome those sorts of mental mistakes. They can't do that. If they play a clean game, again, I think they're going to be competitive. And again, a lot of it's going to come down to special teams and winning on the margins and doing the right thing at the most important time. But yeah, I think this sets up to be a really interesting game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout for some of the reasons that you just presented. But the Patriots need to play an almost perfect game to win this thing.
Tell everybody about the Patriots Report. I know it's you and ex-Patriot Chris Hogan, right?
Yeah, we have an awful lot of fun. Hogan played for the Patriots for a few years, won a couple of Super Bowls about 10 years or so ago. Really offers a fantastic look inside the inner workings of Foxborough and Gillette Stadium on what goes on. And I like to think I bring a lot to the table here as well, because I'm down there every day working for the Boston Globe. But it's a good back and forth. It's a fun back and forth. I love talking with him. He provides a lot of insight, and we have an awful lot of fun. The other day, we talked about the Chris Hogan drinking game. You remember the idea that everyone on the national broadcast would bring up, oh, yeah, by the way, Chris Hogan played college lacrosse. So, and he would say his friends, whenever they would bring that up, college lacrosse, you'd have to take the drink. So we break down X's and O's. We talk about the serious aspects of the game, but we also have a lot of fun along the way.
I'm just curious. I like finding out from people that follow the Patriots. Has there been a general interest in the Texans, or just because of Caserio, we've seen so many Patriot connections come down this way with Bill O'Brien. Wes Welker was on the staff for a little bit. I mean, Caserio and Bill O'Brien like to bring in Patriot people. Do they care? Are they keeping an eye on the Texans? Do they find that kind of fascinating?
Yeah, I do. I think that the Texans appeal to New Englanders, and I think New England football fans find the Texans compelling for a couple of different reasons. First of all, as you mentioned, there have always been seemingly a ton of connections there. When you talk about ex-coaches in New England, going down to Houston, coming back up here, Bill O'Brien, Nick Caserio, going all the way back to, I think Romeo Crennel was down there for a while.
Yeah.
Former players, guys in the locker room today, still we're talking about Shaq Mason, who, kind of cut his teeth up in New England before he went down to Houston. I think the second thing is that, as we mentioned before, I think the Texans are the model for a team. You're talking about turning things around relatively quickly, being able to hit on the quarterback, being able to hit on the coach. And so I think a lot of Patriots fans view the Texans as a model franchise in terms of, look, that's the path that I want to follow. That's what I want my team to do. That's how, you can turn things around relatively quickly. And then the other thing too is the Texans have been a really interesting opponent for New England for an awful long time. When you look at the Patriots over the last almost 20 years or so, a lot of checkmark games, a lot of measuring stick games have come against the Texans. Jacoby Brissett was just talking about it today with us. That was his first start in the National Football League in 2016 on that short week when Houston came up to New England and they beat him 27-0. I think Houston was a team that was, with J.J. Watt in those great teams of that vintage, they just had the bad fortune to be really good at the worst possible time, kind of banging their head on the ceiling when it comes to, going up against a really good Patriots team. So a lot of memorable games, a lot of memorable teams, a lot of memorable individuals, both when you talk about the coaching staff and the rosters. So yeah, I do think there are some shared memories there that make a Patriots-Texans game anytime really interesting.
Yeah, if you go back, I think it was 2012. I don't know if Patriots fans will remember this, but it was very memorable from a Texans fan standpoint. The Texans were rolling. They go into New England late in the season. It's known as the Letterman jacket game down here because all the players dressed up. They had got Texans Letterman jackets and they just got crushed. And it was an embarrassment and frustrating for Texans fans. I will say this, the Patriots have won 2 Super Bowls in Houston at NRG Stadium. The first one in 2004. I'll never forget that year. I went to 2 games as a fan that year. And one of the games was against the Panthers, who the Patriots faced in the Super Bowl. The Texans beat the Panthers, and then they faced the Patriots later that year. And I remember that I believe the Texans either missed or had a late field goal block that went into overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Texans almost beat the Patriots. Patriots won that game in overtime, but it was crazy because I thought, man, the Texans – just this new franchise, 3rd year, and they practically, maybe as a 2nd year, they practically beat both teams in the Super Bowl that year.
Yeah, it's so much of the Patriots' history, at least when you're talking about the first dynasty, obviously the win, Super Bowl 38, but so much of the Patriots' history is kind of wrapped up in Houston, whether you're talking about the city or you're talking about the opponent or whatever the case may be. You can't write the story of the New England Patriots and their successes over the last 20 years or so without mentioning Houston. Again, whether it's the team, whether it's the backdrop, whatever you're talking about. So I think that adds another layer to this matchup because whenever you see Patriots Texans on the schedule, at least from a New Englander's perspective, there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of nostalgia there. And I think it's more intriguing than, say, a Patriots-Jaguars matchup, regardless of the team, regardless of the year, because of the shared history that New England and Houston have when it comes to football.
Yeah, Houston fans will send no thank yous for Jack Easterby, though. That was the worst of the worst of the Patriots that came. It took a miracle for us to dig out of the Jack Easterby mess. But, hey, I can't tell you how much I appreciate having you and talking a little bit about this game. Looking forward to the game, but hopefully we can do this again. Thanks for taking the time.
Definitely. Take care, Robert. We'll talk again soon.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.